And when we were talking about this yesterday, I was like, I'm just in charge at poignant. What I found really cool was that
Welcome. Thank you, everybody, for coming on behalf of Harrisburg University. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your afternoon with me. We have a lot of great things to talk about. What we're going to talk about today is probably the biggest challenge that's facing us in our global enterprise today. And that's the fact that we're not all in the same place anymore. And co-location is something that we dream about and we hope and pray will happen to us. So just to do by way of introduction, this is me, in case it looks just like me. I work for the Solutions IQ division of Accenture. We're a recent acquisition of Accenture. I just recently got my Agile coaching and Agile facilitation certifications. Currently working on coactive coaching, which is personal and professional coaching. That's kind of the next step for me. But this is one of my field of expertise. We're here because Agile and Lean principles apply broadly. They apply to all sorts of teams, not just development teams, not just deployment teams, not just QA teams. They apply to any kind of work. We want to try and apply all of these good things that we know about leanness and agility into as broad as many things as we can. But it's very, very hard to do when your teams are distributed or dispersed. Okay, very, very hard to do. And one of the ways that we can combat that is with distributed tooling. So because we have the internet available to us and we have all these great products available that allow us to interconnect and collaborate, we can use those, but they're not the answer. They're part of the answer. They're definitely not the answer. We know it's not the answer because the first Agile value is that there's other things we value over than tools. So we don't make tools the focus of our objective. We're going to talk a lot about proxies, and proxies are basically a way of mitigating some of the issues of not having presence at all the various locations where work is being done. We're also going to talk a little bit about how we can use DevOps, not just be DevOps, but also use DevOps as a way to move information around and help distribute value globally. We're going to talk a little bit about socialization and acculturization, because that's one of the key ways that we build communities out of dispersed and distributed teams. Okay, we use that. And lastly, I'm going to make the very bold statement that distributed teams, dispersed teams are here to stay. They're not going anywhere. As a matter of fact, it's much more likely that you will work on a team in the future that you will never meet than anything else. The days of having everybody together in one nice place with one big visual information radar, those days are over. Okay? And it's not just me that's saying it. I see it out in the world. And we'll talk a lot about this. So here's an interesting question. Let's start off right here. Where on earth is my team? Okay, I've worked for companies where we had people working in India, which is 10.5 hours ahead from Eastern Time. People working in California, 3 hours behind. People working in Europe, depending on where in Europe, 5 or 6 hours ahead. People working in Asia, 12 hours behind or 12 hours ahead, depending on whether you care what day it is. Okay, if you don't, that's fine. But this presents a really interesting challenge, because we think of Agile as like, oh yeah, it's this great thing. We get together, we work together, we do everything together, and by being together creates the atmosphere that we need for agility and leanness to really work, for us to really get into it. But if we don't live where our teams are, how do we manage that? How do we create that feeling of teamness with someone that we will likely never meet, quite likely only see in Skype, and may not even know how to pronounce their name, certainly not know their wife, certainly not know their children, not even know the holidays that they celebrate? Okay, and this is a very, very interesting problem. Outsourcing is not going anywhere. Now the question is it onshore, offshore, nearshore? I'm saying we're getting to a point where that doesn't matter. Okay? Remember, here's the analog that I like to use now. Those of us who, like me, I was born just at the end of the baby boomers. I was born in 1964. So I remember things like rotary telephones. My kids look at a rotary telephone, they're like, hey, Dad, how do you work this thing? Like, what end do you talk into? It's like, okay. Now, when I was a kid, there was local calls and long distance calls, and that's erased. There's no such thing. I have very, very dear friends that live in Sweden, South Africa. I have friends that live in India. I have friends that live in Japan, and I can have a conversation with them for free anytime we both want to talk. And that's an amazing thing. But it's on the rise, and it's never going to go back. We're never going to see a situation again where we have the majority of teams together physically. So, one of the things that we Agile coaches love to do is show our fluency in Japanese, primarily because of one word, kanban, which is a Japanese word, which of course has been mistranslated many times. It just means workboard. It's not anything really exciting. But there's another word that we like to throw around, and that's gemba. Everybody ever heard gemba? Everybody heard that word? Okay. And gemba, here it is in Japanese. Gemba literally means the real place. And it was referred to back in the early days of Lean as being the place where the work is actually done. The real place where the work is done. So what's my analogy to gemba? For me, when you sit in meetings all day, you're not working. You're talking about work. It's meta work. When you're at your desk doing your work, that's the gemba. That's where the work is done. So you can say meetings are not the gemba. The gemba refers to, for example, the assembly line. That's the gemba, okay? Remember, this was invented by Toyota in the 70s. So their idea of the gemba was, if you're an executive and you want to know what's going on, don't tell a flunky to go find out what's going on. Get out of your chair, go down to where the work is being done and see what's going on. Make some interesting questions, observe, and that's how you learn. That's the gemba. But the problem is, when we have distributed teams scattered all over the world, where is the gemba? Okay? It's a really interesting question. Now, if you're together with your team and you're physically co-located, you can have physical gemba. You can actually have a place, a collaboration place, and have things like privacy. Okay? Those things are over. Those days are over. Without that, we don't share information so well. Okay? We need that, the notion that we're close together gives us a better sense of information. And the classic example would be different levels of communication. For example, I send you a text. Okay, that's like sending you a telegram. I have very, very little information to go by. I can't see your eyes. I can't see your body language. I can't hear the inflection in your voice. So that's a very low information way of transmitting. What we would prefer to do is have high quality information, face-to-face conversations, okay? So how do we do that? If teams are not sharing information, then you end up in the lean killer, which is the start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. That's what kills leanness and agility. You want to get to a situation where value and information is flowing through the organization. And you can only tell it when it's there. Okay? It's kind of a Zen thing. When it's happening, you know it. Okay? So how do we achieve this? Well, here's something that maybe you didn't expect. I'm going to throw you some linguistics from a completely different part of the world. Does anybody here speak any Scandinavian language? Good, good. No, I'm happy about that because I'm going to teach you one word that you would like to know. And that word is fika. Fika, F-I-K-A in Swedish, is a word that has absolutely no translation in English. And it means kind of very, very loosely the feeling you get when you're sitting together with your friends and having a cup of coffee. All right? Now, that may sound like a strange thing to want to have a word for, but it's meaningful. Because when you're in that place, when you're relaxed, when you don't feel the pressure from outside, when you're focused on conversation, when you're focused on sharing information with people who you consider friends in a friendly atmosphere, work is more tolerable. You do better work in the fika. That's where you want to tend to be. So the question goes to the table. How do we create global fika? How do we create that feeling in a team that may be no two people in the same place on the globe? It's an interesting question. New school, we have co-located open areas. where I can leave my stuff and it will be there when I get back. Okay, that's very important. Also, we have plentiful collaboration spaces. When I'm in this world of cubicles, where do I get together with my mates to have a discussion about a technical issue or a business issue? Okay, and the answer is you really don't. So what do? You send email chains around? Terribly inefficient way to communicate, and contrary to the spirit of the Agile Manifesto. The Agile Manifesto wants us to talk with each other. That's what our brains are wired to do. We are wired to do. The very, very first thing that we recognize as soon as we're born is the human face. There is nothing on earth more powerful than that. You want to know how I know? Because I bet in all of your lives, you've seen human faces in things all over the place. You know, you look at a marble wall, what do you see? Right? Okay, you are wired to see faces. You're wired for expression. You're wired for intonation. You're wired for body language. Okay? We have to have places where we can go and have a conversation. So we also have to introduce this idea of shared space where we can have private collaboration. We also need to use collaboration and communication tools, which I am heavily vested in. In my job, I use, everybody Slackers here? Everybody use Slack? Slack, awesome, right? But I also have to use Skype. I also have to use Microsoft Teams. I also have to use Jira because that's what my client uses. So I'm constantly switching around these different places. And you get used to it after a while, but we don't have any choice. It's either that or the telephone. But you're always better off seeing someone's face while you're having a conversation than not. You will get more than just the verbal information when you see someone's face. So minimally when you have conversations, look at each other, see each other. And this is a clue, which I will talk about a little later, that in order to make this effective, you can't have this global co-location with groups that are too large. If you have 40 people talking, that's not a potent conversation. That's a town hall. That's a different meeting. Okay? We're talking about working together. Then you're in that zone. The perfect zone is the size of the Scrum and Agile team, 5 to 9 people. Anything more than that, it becomes fractured. Okay? So we want to be right in that sweet spot, 5 to 9 people. But here's the issue. Physical location is required by all of these things. We can't have any of this stuff unless we have an actual physical location. So we have to take all the things that we believe this new school benefit is and map it into the world. How do we do that? Well, we're going to use distributed tools, obviously. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Things that are global, what I call global enablement tools, which are tools that allow us to be global. Okay? We already talked about communication tools, but there's other things that we can use. For example, Agile management or Agile project management software. How many people here use some Agile management tool, Jira version 1, right? Oh, you guys, does that make your life easier or harder? Okay, that should be a clue right there. But still, it allows stuff to be shared in a very efficient way, so that when I talk about a bundle of work, I can point right to that place. The trick is, who is the one that updates all that information? And that's, once again, that's also another talk. I don't want to dig into our vendor partners either. But social media is another way to do that. And for example, Atlassian, and once again, I'm not endorsing Atlassian, it's just an example. But Atlassian, which is the parent company that produces Jira, they have a fully integrated technical and social media stack. In other words, they have all the things you need to have social media, plus all the things you need to do to release and deploy and track defects and blah, blah, blah. And store your code and build your code. It's all in one place. So at Confluence, for example, gives us a way of like looking at DevOps. We can actually watch it. We can actually watch value flow through the system. But here, I can tell you something. Overzealousness of tools destroys socialization. It destroys communication. Destroys communication. Okay, so be very, very careful. And I will say this, although I won't put it on the slide, that all of the high-performing teams that I've worked with in my career the more high performant they were, the less they relied on agile management tools, period. Okay? So you hear about these guys, oh, we're releasing 62 times a day. So what do? We centralize information, and we keep that information centralized so that people, no matter where they are, no matter when they're working, can access it. And once again, that's only part of the equation. We have to remember, the tool itself doesn't matter. It's the idea behind the tool. You always want to go with, which this should make sense to everybody here, the simplest tool that will get the job done, right? For example, you have to put up a picture. You want to use a hammer, not a jackhammer, right? You want to use the simplest tool to get the job done. But the tool is not a substitute for diligence. A tool is something that you use for storage and finding, not for management. Management is done by people, not by tools. Okay? And we want to organize work around the salient points of the tool set. And I will say this, that no matter what tool you do use, whether it's something very simple, like just a social media conversational tool like Slack, or something really, really comprehensive, like Agile Central or version 1 or Enterprise Jira, no matter what, you will never be able to use that out of the box. You're always going to have to tailor it, at least for your work, if not for how your organization operates. Okay? So there's always going to be some amount of customization, and that has to come into the calculus of how these tools are intended to be used. Okay? So, my favorite tools are the non-agile collaborative tools. But here's the problem. Once we get into this world, then it starts to become very, very difficult to globalize. So here's the tension. We have simple tools for high collaboration. We have complex tools for low collaboration. I know it doesn't make any sense. So the talk is about how do we rectify that. But I still say, whiteboards, markers, sticky notes, scrum tape. Everybody knows what scrum tape is, right? I always have this running joke. And they say, oh, what's that cool blue tape that you use for everything? And I say, oh, that's scrum tape. Where do you get it? Oh, it's really expensive. It's like $100 a roll. So we got to be very careful about it. And they're like, well, can't I just go to Home Depot and get some? I was like, yeah, I mean, you can, but that's not scrum tape. All right, that's just regular masking tape. I only do it as a joke to see if they're paying attention. But yeah, it's one of the most useful things. The only reason I don't have some in my bag today is because I knew I wouldn't need it today. But that's something, Post-it notes, markers, everywhere I go, I have that stuff with me. Because that's the way we communicate best. All these things, real-time collaboration in any way, it really does foster collective ownership. If you do it often enough, and if you do it in a way where people feel included. And probably a better tool for that type of collaboration than like keeping track of stories and features and capabilities and work items and stuff like that are to use mind mapping tools. Has anybody here ever used a mind mapping tool? I got an example of it coming up. But mind mapping, cloud-based diagramming, these are ways of showing informational relationships and organizing and gathering information. Another way that a lot of shops do this is they will actually create wikis of information about their product and about their development practices. And like I said, most high-performing teams, paper only. The highest performing teams that I have worked with so far, all they use are sticky notes, nothing else. And they crank it out so fast when you sit there and you're like, damn, they just had their act completely together. Okay? And all they do is use sticky notes. We'll have to take questions a little bit. So here's an example of mind mapping. This is actually, once again, this is not an endorsement, but it's called Coggle. And all it does is it allows us to have a way of introducing topics and hierarchical information about those topics. And I say this is a great way to share information. Okay, so this is a great type of thing. It's called either mind mapping. You may also have heard it as a semantic networking. And there's tons of tools out here, distributed tools, that are perfectly safe and perfectly secure that you can use to collaborate with people all over the place. They can add information. They can update information, okay? So you have this kind of continuous update and management of this mind-mapped information. And then when you need to work on stuff, that's when you drill in and you start to get into the user story world, when you actually engage that value. So here's a canonical Agile team. Of course, your Agile team will probably have arms and facial features and legs, but you know, this is what I got, okay? So, canonical Agile team or Scrum team, 5 to 9 people. Why 5 to 9? Anybody ever ask themselves that question? Why do you think it's 5 to 9? Anybody have an answer?
It becomes really hard to communicate with each other as you have more people.
Exactly. 9 is psychologically speaking, when they do these studies and they say, okay, we'll put 3 people in the room and see what they can do. Then we'll put 4 people in the room and see what they can do. 5 to 9 is the most productive size of teams because it's not too small. If it's too small, then you can't spread the workload out. Okay? You can't have a Scrum Master and a product owner and one other person. That's not a team. That's 3 people. Understand the difference? Okay? It's only one person doing the work. It's not a team. Generally speaking, we want our Agile lean teams to be cross-functional, and cross-functional is very misunderstood. Cross-functional does not necessarily imply that anyone on any team can do anything. That's not the intention. The intention of cross-functionality means everyone on the team understands what everybody else is doing and why, and can help out when help is needed. Canonical Agile team is co-located in time and space. And notice I use time and space, because if you're co-located in time but not in space, where are you? You're right where we are now, okay? So when people in India are getting ready to go home, you're on your way driving to work. So we are not co-located in time or space, okay? And the canonical Agile team, the presumption is, and it's not really written, the presumption is that we have homogeneous culture, so that people don't have any issue understanding each other when we're sharing information or being creative. Okay, that is a huge obstacle. As anybody who's worked on a distributed team knows, it's a big obstacle. So, how do we make this work? How do we make it so that no matter where our team is physically or temporarily located, that we can make it work? And the way we make it work is by proxies. Okay? Most people are familiar with the word proxy when we talk about like shareholder voting and stuff like that. You elect a proxy to vote on your behalf. So a proxy can be defined as someone who does your bidding on your behalf, okay? So they're kind of your representative, okay? So the way we make this work is when we have people who are distributed and are working in another place, we empower them to make just-in-time decisions. So if I have people over in India who are working while I'm sleeping and I don't empower them, are they Agile? What's a non-empowered Agile team? So we push those decisions out. Now, proxy does not mean that you get to make decisions based on your own understanding. Proxy reflect the wishes of the real occupiers of those roles. So if you are a proxy Scrum Master, you're empowered, but you're empowered within the guidance of the real Scrum Master. You can't change the way the team behaves. Okay, that's not the purpose of a proxy. Proxy obeys the person that they're proxying for. So one of the best examples is a product owner. Everybody's familiar with a product owner. Well, they're a proxy for the customer. They don't take what the customer wants and twist it around and then tell you. That's not their worth. Okay? What's the worth of a product owner is someone who goes to a customer and then comes back to your team and tells you exactly what the customer wants, exactly how they feel about what they want, exactly how they feel about the work that's being done, what their expectations are, what do they really want. And they tell the stories that express value from the customer's standpoint. That's their job. They are a proxy for the customer. Your product owner should be telling you in the customer's voice exactly what your customers want. They don't decide what the customer wants. So here's the classic troika. Now we've gone from Japanese, we got a little Scandinavian, now we got a little Russian here. Troika, which is a kind of an anglicization of the Russian word troitsa, and it's nothing fancy. It just means trinity or triad or triangle. And the idea is, at least from this is really kind of brazenly stolen from Scaled Agile, is that we have a balance of these three forces in our enterprise in order to make sure things work. And we have to have free flow of information around this troika. And this troika meeting, the troika coming together and making decisions, that's what determines the future state of the team. Okay? And there's three parties to this. There's the product owner. They're the proxy for the customer. They represent the customer's wishes. They represent the end state of desired product development. Then we have the Scrum Master. They represent operations. Their responsibility is organization and facilitation, and also the occasional removing of obstacles where necessary. All of these things that are operational come under the Scrum Master's purview. And then we have technology and deployment and DevOps and all that stuff. That comes under architecture for back-endy infrastructural stuff. It comes under UX for stuff that we develop that our customers are going to see and use. So why is this important? It's important because we have to have this balance across the distributed team. And a lot of teams make the mistake by empowering people locally for these three jobs, and then everybody else gets starved out. All they do is wait for orders. Okay? And then that puts us in the start, stop, agile mean killing phase. Okay? We don't want to be there. So how do we make something like a distributed team work with proxies? Well, here is the diagram. Here's exactly, so here we are here in America, and here's our product owner and our Scrum Master here somewhere in Western Pennsylvania. It's 2:30 a.m. Everybody's sleeping. This guy, well, he's up, reading something, but he's supposed to be sleeping. And then our friends in India, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. They just finished their delicious lunch, and they have some questions, okay? But isn't it incredibly valuable to have someone in India who knows what the customer wants? Here's a better question. Why would you not have someone in India who knows what the customer wants? And what they can do is they say, well, if they know what the customer wants, they can operate independently. They can check back with people the next day. But like I said, we would rather do work, make a mistake, and fix it than not do work. Okay? We would rather do work and make a mistake and fix it than be idle. All right? So we don't want these people waiting. We want them always to have something to do. Every day. Well, listen, let me ask you a question. When you wake up in the morning every day to go to work, do you know what you have to do every day? Okay? Now let's say you didn't. What would you do then? So if you're going to have teams that are distributed, you really need to take advantage of this proxification. It really does work. And when I say to someone who's a distributed person, look, you need to spend some time learning the business so you can make ad hoc decisions, that is inclusion. When I say to someone who's 10 time zones away, look, you have to learn our DevOps deployment system because we need a backup in case things happen in the middle of the night. You're in the middle of your work day while I'm, off in dreamland. I mean, it's a perfect thing if you can get it to work. It's a great way of distributing not just the responsibility, but also the workload by having these proxies out. Proxy product owners. Now we have to remember, the proxy product owner that's in your distributed part of your team, they don't represent the customer directly. They represent the product owner. Okay, the product owner is the one who represents the customer. The proxy product owner in your distributed part of your team represents the product owner. So they have to have a good, tight relationship. They have to talk all the time. They should be familiar enough with what needs to be done to make those just-in-time decisions without you getting a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay? It's always better to do something than do nothing. You can still learn, even if you build something that isn't going to get deployed. We all know this. Okay? So don't be worried about making decisions. You can never gather enough data to make fully informed decisions. Just-in-time decisions, good enough. Okay? When these decisions are made, however, it is the responsibility of the proxy to fill in the product owner as well, so that when these decentralized decisions are made, those decisions are then funneled back into the product management team through the product owner. That's why we have stand-ups. Oh, so what'd you do today? Oh, well, we made this decision. That has to come back to the team and back to the product owner. So that's why you still all have to figure out a time where you're all together, because if you make replanning decisions, you must make them as a team. If you're not, you're cheating your team members. They need to have input, they need to have inclusivity. And also, the proxy product owner, generally, the product owner accepts stories as done. Proxy product owner doesn't have that privilege. Only the actual product owner gets the privilege of declaring things as done. Proxy Scrum Masters, okay? Proxy Scrum Masters are useful because you will have operational decisions, other things that will happen in the field. You need to have someone with that level of responsibility, with operational, organizational responsibility that acts as a proxy for the Scrum Master. Same exact thing. We make just-in-time operational decisions. What do we mean by operational decisions? I mean, what do we do next? Okay, that's an operational decision. What's the next thing that what's the next high priority thing that we need to pull to start working on? Operational decision. Estimation and prioritization. They're technically operational decisions because they're informing us what's the work that we have to pull next. If it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it's 2:30 in the morning in Pittsburgh, I'm not going to be able to know. I need to be able to decide what the next piece of work is that I need to pull. Proxy Scrum Master can help us do that. Also, the Scrum Master will be responsible on helping the remote team stay in communication, helping the remote team work with distributed planning, and also one of the other duties of the Scrum Master is, of course, to help remove impediments where possible. And also, it is the responsibility of any proxy, including the proxy Scrum Master, to deliver that news back to the team of any decisions or plan changes that were made while everybody was sleeping. Proxy architects. This may sound crazy, but yeah, we want to have our distributed teams hooked into our architecture and our infrastructure. They must understand the workflow through the entire release train. They have to understand that. Some enterprises actually provide that remotely. So you may actually be working with user experience designers that are remote. That makes things very difficult. But if you have someone on the outside who's kind of oversees that and is a proxy for that, they can have some control of that and wire that in. This will require, no matter how you slice it, it will require that additional coordination. As a matter of fact, I'm seeing more and more and more of offshoring of shared services than ever before. Architecture, UX, testing, integration, all that stuff, I'm seeing more and more of that stuff move towards the distributed teams. Additional benefits. What's really interesting is that when this starts to work, and I have a team that's split in 2 locales. We'll try to keep it to the most simple. You may actually see that if your distributed part of your team is fully empowered and their heads are fully in the game and they're fully included, they will actually start to discover things that will improve your team and your team's ability to create value. Okay? So having that capability, that actually gives us, a sub-team that we can look for improvements. Proxies also have a better understand of the culture, the local culture of the team. So that allows us to have better insight in unlocking their creativity and their intrinsic value. We need to prevent the us and them attitude and anti-pattern from developing. There is no them, there is just us, and we all have to collectively put our heads together and get the work done. So, how do we get face-to-face? That's a good question. Agile Manifesto is very, very clear on the matter. Okay, that face-to-face communication, that's the way to go, for all the benefits that we've already discussed. But what do we do when our teams are in non-overlapping time zones? How do we have the equivalent of Gemba for a team that's far away? And that's why I say co-location is really more a mental thing than a physical thing. Co-location is an attitude. not a state of being. And it's more about unity of ideas and unity of techniques and shared experience and also collective ownership. It's more important than actually physically being next to somebody. Distributed stand-ups can be interesting. Most distributed teams have overlapping stand-ups. You'll know this if you have your stand-up particularly early. If you have your stand-ups at 7:30 a.m., I guarantee you got someone in Bangalore or Mumbai. Guarantee it. Or you just like getting up early. It's a possibility. Okay. That's not a bad thing because we want to use those stand-ups to kind of get back everywhere that we are. Now it's kind of interesting because you'll have some people that'll be the beginning of their day and some people that'll be the end of their day. And the trick is to kind of maintain the 24-hour feeling of the work being delivered continuously. And it's the Scrum Masters and product owners and their proxies that are kind of responsible for making that happen. And here we go, distributed planning, okay? SAFE recommends that every 10 weeks, we get everybody together in the entire Agile release train, or everyone together in the entire solution, and we get them together in one physical place, and we plan and plan and plan and plan and for 2 days. And then at the end of those 2 days, we've managed to acquire enough insight where we can actually plan the next 8 weeks out. That's the canonical approach that's scaled out. But there's some problems there, okay? The problem is the expense of getting everybody into one place is ginormous. And we know that a lot of companies are starting to really crack down on travel expenses because travel is expensive. So the idea that you can get all these people together in one place, you got to fly them there, you have to feed them, you have to give them a place to sleep, all those things increase the cost, okay? So a lot more companies are going away from the co-located PI planning or co-located big enterprise planning down to distributed planning. How do we do this? Well, we extend that out to the people who are working, and we try to do our best to keep them roped in. Get too deep in that. But one thing you should never do, a team member should never find out what they're working on after planning. That's bad. Because what you're saying to that team member is they're not really a team member. Okay? They're not a full-fledged member of your team. Don't let that happen if you can avoid that. Try to be inclusive. Try as hard as you can. And I know there are challenges, but try. Distributed DevOps, well, now that we have these fantastic DevOps tools, it's very easy to implement a global DevOps solution because we have sophisticated telemetry that allows us to manage and measure DevOps in real time. And that really helps us in this world very, very much, okay? So we can actually have coordinated DevOps that are irrespective of time zone lag. So remember we said we should be able to deploy and release on demand? Well, that means 24/7, any time zone. So you may wake up and come to work and then find out that there was a deployment that happened when you were sleeping, okay? If you see that, you should be proud. That's the most awesome possible situation, that you have a clean master branch and deployed software out there being tested, okay? It does put more pressure on DevOps to be global, but it's worth it because you always have eyes on the system 24 hours a day. That's so important. You don't have to worry about that. If there's something going wrong, by the time you get to your desk or by the time you check your email in the morning, you'll know about it. And we can use this tenant model to really make that efficient so that we can have pieces of teams all over the place in that tenant model, sharing deployment space, sharing code space, sharing all these things. It just takes a little extra coordination and a little extra forethought to get this to work. How else do we do that? This is my favorite part, is we have what I call cross-cultural celebration. And we have to have these things called distributed parties. Anybody ever attended a distributed party? Okay, has anybody here ever attended a party? Okay. Well, distributed parties are just like parties, except everybody's not in the same place. So that doesn't mean you're having any less of a good time. Now, I know it may be a little weird because, like I said, some people are going to be sleeping when other people are going to be awake and stuff like that. But it does cultivate an interest in how other cultures work. It's so important to have a global team to have an understanding of the cultures of the people that you're working with. And you can only understand that by having these conversations. I know more about Indian holidays than I ever thought I would, because we all celebrate all of our holidays together. So we got everybody together and we had our Diwali celebration. It was fantastic. We had 150 people having a celebration in 7 different locations, and we had a blast. Everybody brought in food, and it was just amazing. We had such a good time, and we left from that with a feeling of unity that we never had until we had that, because that's our global fika. Remember, we talked about that. When we eat together, when we drink together, when we have coffee together, that's the comfortable feeling that we're looking like. We don't want that austere feeling. We want to feel like we're just friends talking about the things that we like. That's the best way to get creative people to be creative. Linguistic challenges, oh boy. Yeah, well, I have a lot of people who say, oh, you know, I can't really work with so-and-so because I really can't understand them. Okay, that's a real big problem, okay? What's the weight about that? Well, I mean, we can't learn every global language. So what we try to do is we try to make sure we at least connect on the very most important things, okay? The most important things, business terminology, personas, things about Agile, Lean, XP, Safe, all these things. At least we need to have a common language that we all speak so that we can have those cross-cultural conversations. This actually works. Breaking the ice, one of the things I like to do, and you can see right over there, one of the things that we like to do is we have online games, and I couldn't bring anything with us. So I'm afraid I've run out of time. I know we did cover a lot of stuff. Please do feel free. I'm easy to find. Also very, very active on LinkedIn. Not so much on Twitter anymore, but you can occasionally find me there. I appreciate you guys for coming. I hope I've at least planted some seeds of ideas as to how you guys can make your work better with your colleagues all over the globe. So with that, I say thank you all very, very much for attending. I appreciate it.